And when the FIA are making mistakes and having trouble with their yellow lights, whatever it is on the safety car, and they should have had that piece of debris picked up long before it was smashed, when all that's going on, that's not a moment to start penalising a driver. It's all very well to get excited about Lewis at Ferrari in a quick car, but he's got Charles Leclerc to beat in the same car. And Lando Norris has got Oscar Piastri to beat in the same car. And Oscar Piastri will go for a gap that maybe Lando won't. That's the difference. And that's a big problem for Lando. It wasn't just outbraking. It wasn't bravery. It wasn't this. It was just pure finesse from Max and perfect positioning of the car where George, although George was trying to intimidate him, he always could see Max in the position where George, wanted to be. And that was enough in the end for George to have to back away.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the F1 Hour with my friend and yours, the goatiest of all F1 minds to have ever goated, the one that they call Mr. Peter D. Windsor. How are you doing, good sir?
I'm doing very well, mate. Yeah, it's been a long, arduous weekend, isn't it? But yeah, getting there. Just taking Dexter for a walk, so kind of, beautiful morning here. What more can I say?
Good man. We don't want to hear about all of your sunshine in sunny Spain, Peter. Do you know what I mean? We can't.
It is gorgeous here. This is the best time of the year to be in Spain. Absolutely beautiful. I remember when we used to go testing in Jerez in the winter and how beautiful it was. We'd land at Gibraltar and then drive up from Gibraltar and the mist around the mountains in the mornings at this time of year. And it's exactly the same where we are. Just incomparable, really. Lucky.
Very fortunate, Mr. Windsor. Enough of all that before we have all our viewers dial out green with envy. There is a bit of F1 that we need to talk to, a couple of F1-centric threads at which we need to pull, as is customary, sir. What do you think the biggest story was to come out of the Qatar Grand Prix this weekend?
I have to say two in this case. I'd say Max's revenge, because it's we're not talking Kevin Magnussen, Sergio Perez here. We're talking a guy who's just put it out there to get the pole, and then the pole's taken away from him. So it was a hugely significant thing the stewards did to do that. And we can get onto that. And I put a video out expressing my views anyway. I think it was a ludicrous decision. But then he just, it was very Nigel Mansell-esque. I can imagine in that situation, Nigel would just say, "Oh, I'll get him into the first corner, you wait." And I can imagine he was saying that to Helmut and a few others, and it's exactly
George,
what he
Peter,
did. Exactly what he did.
Yeah.
Well, just brilliant. Helped, of course, by George being on used tires. I don't know what that was all about, how Mercedes managed to contrive that situation. But anyway, again, we'll put that to another side. And then I think the other thing is just the general incompetence of the FIA and everything they did from that decision onwards. I don't think they should have penalized Lando because there was so much confusion about the debris, and before that, the mirror anyway. The green, the yellow, green. Nobody knew what was going on. The lights didn't work on the safety car. The whole thing was a joke. And in that condition, I don't think Lando should have got penalized. I think we was robbed. The spectators were robbed of what could have been a great race right through to the end. And Lando had a better car, I think, than Max. I don't think he would have beaten him, but I think it would have been close. And so, those are the two key elements, I think.
Yeah, let's talk about the second one first, Peter, because I watched back the onboard of both Lando and Max, and it wasn't lost on me that Lando had an extra bite at the double-waved yellow cherry. He got a flashing yellow light in addition to the double-waved and didn't see either. Max Verstappen, on the other hand, he was too far down the track, so he only got one bite of the cherry, didn't see the flashing yellow, but saw the double-waved, and then had the wherewithal to be cognizant of how close Lando was behind him. Can we have a look whether Lando did Lando
who was
lift?
Who was it on the McLaren pit wall after Baku who said, "Oh, Lando should have ignored the yellows"? Was it Andrea Stella? He's just following instructions, is he not? You can't win with all these critics of Lando Norris. I think he did the right thing in Baku, and he made a mistake in Qatar, but it was an understandable mistake based on the mayhem and the dreadful logistics, really, of the whole FIA thing. And I think on that occasion, it was an exception. They should have turned a blind eye to that, and because they'd already made a mistake. And the big mistake, in my opinion, was, again, it's a bit like saying you can either be on a cool down lap or a push lap, but you can't be on a warm up lap. They don't distinguish between the three, quite obviously. And it's the same thing. They, when debris is on the circuit, it's either a safety car or nothing. And the virtual safety car was the perfect solution to allow a marshal to jump over the fence and pick up that mirror and get it back the other side of the pit wall. What is the problem with that? All the cars file down on the left side of the pit straight, and a marshal goes over the barrier. Where's the issue? But that wasn't even in their book, so they didn't even consider it. They were just waffling around wondering what to do with the mirror, and then suddenly somebody runs over it, and mayhem. After that, it was mayhem because of the poor decision not to get the mirror up off the ground in the first place.
Right.
As I said in my video, I've been lucky enough to be a flag marshal for quite a number of years, and a number of times you just jump over the wall, pick up an exhaust pipe or a bit of windscreen or a bit of wing or whatever it is, just back there, Bob's your uncle. It's not it's a problem if you can't see in advance for about, I don't know, 3 or 4 corners, but we always could where we were stationed, and you can certainly do it today in a Grand Prix with GPS. So what's the issue? Anyway, if you get all the cars down in virtual safety car file, where is the problem? I don't get it at all. And that's the issue. There's too much bureaucracy, too much red tape, too many bits of paper, too many meetings. There's nobody there, a Charlie Whiting or a Bernie Ecclestone, to say, get on with it.
There's too many everything, Peter.
Yeah, exactly. And everybody's worried about making the wrong decision, so they make no decisions at all. It's a bit like trying to design a rear upright for a Ferrari Formula One car. Take that back. Ferrari doing a very good job at the moment.
They're not being bad. So go on then, Peter. If you've got to solve for these multitudinous ineptitudes that the FIA are suffering from, how do you do it? Because it feels like it's more than just operational. The infrastructure, Mohammed Ben Sulayem, the 1 point, there's loads going on in the background. What's the panacea here, Peter? How do you solve for it, leveraging your infinite wisdom?
Just break away, do a completely new championship without the FIA and run it itself. Have somebody with a brain like Alex Wirtz or Derek Warwick or somebody good at the top making quick decisions, and get on with it. Steve Nielsen. There's a lot of good people in Formula One. They just don't seem to be working for the FIA, or they used to, but they've all left. That's the solution. There is no other solution, because if you continue down this path, it's all going to be more and more meetings, more and more investigations, more and more procedures, and it'll get worse and worse. Formula One is not a sport where you can mess around and think about what you're going to do. You've got to react at that millisecond, and it's got to be the right decision. 80% of the time, 20% factor, fudge factor. Okay, we occasionally make mistakes, but it wasn't difficult when that mirror was on the ground to make a decision. Get it off the track now. Virtual safety car, 2 laps, no problem. Bob's your uncle. Get on with it.
Very well said, sir.
And again, I go back to the Max thing. There was not even an attempt to realize that Max was on a warm-up lap as distinct from a cool-down lap, or to look at what was going on in front of him, with Fernando braking massively, suddenly going from 7th to 3rd gear in front of Max. No attempt to even talk about that.
Yeah, which is, again, I mean, what else are we expecting from I almost think we're being naive to expect anything other than incompetence at this stage from the FIA, Peter. It's been a story for the past 36 months, since Abu Dhabi.
It's interesting. We're going back to the place where it all began, aren't we?
100%.
And it's sad. It's sad, but it's not surprising, I suppose, because we live in this world of everything having to be so visible, and everybody is paranoid about doing the wrong thing, as I say. And then insurance companies weigh in as well. And there's one incident where somebody gets sued and they go bankrupt as a result. And because of that, the world gets covered with red tape. I mean, I was out with my son, Jack, the other day. He was with wasn't with his normal coach, actually. He's in a different coach, just to sort of see what it was like with some kids from school. And we're having some fun. And I was walking on the path, and the coach came up and said, "Oh, you're not allowed to walk on the path. This is a concrete path on the side of the golf course." I said, "But I'm his father. Why not?" He said, "Oh, no, insurance, it's a private property." I said, "Yeah, I know. All golf courses are basically private unless you're playing a municipal one." And he said, "Oh, no, insurance, mate. If you get hit by a ball, that'll be it. You've got to get off the course." I thought, well, the world's gone completely mad. Well, and we saw that effectively. We saw that in Qatar, I think. It's just all, we can't do that. We can't do this.
Yeah.
And it's all to do with insurance and liability and money and money.
Agreed.
And I've always said, and this sounds like, I know I'll be the only person in the world saying this, but there is too much money in Formula One. It's too big, and success is not always a function of growth and money. It's not a measurable function of that. It's also about doing it correctly and doing it for the right reasons. And people ask me, why are you so into rallying? I hate rallying. Why are you into rallying, Peter? I'll tell you one of the reasons I'm into rallying. There's not so much money in rallying, and people get on and do what they do incredibly well, and they make do with what they've got. And that's what racing people do incredibly well. That's what Bruce McLaren was all about. That's what Jack Brabham was all about. That's what Jim Clark was all about. That's what Sterling Moss was all about. And to some extent, it's what Michael Schumacher was all about when he put together that Ferrari team with Jean Todt. It's putting things together and making it work. It's not expecting committees to deliver for you. And that's what happens when you have too much money and too many people and too much growth. But that's what we're in now. Everybody's saying, isn't it wonderful? Netflix here, Liberty there, so much money, 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 money. But it's not actually a great thing, because money brings with it all the stuff that you're talking about now in Qatar, which is red tape, bureaucracy, liability issues, too many people trying to voice an opinion, too many people wanting to be put and seen in a powerful position for the benefit of their ego rather than for the good of the sport. And it's all because there's too much money. And they've taken all the money out of the rest of motorsport. It's all in Formula One. And we're seeing that chaos now. That chaos in Formula One, all because of that. And you can walk down a pit lane at a WEC meeting or World Rally Championship event, and you can smell the air, and you can smell that it's racing air, and it's real people doing what they do for the love of it. And that may sound old-fashioned, but it's reality.
Blimey, Mr. Windsor. Wax lyrical, why don't you, Mr. Windsor? But let me disagree with
How do we get onto that subject?
I know, Peter, we always end up at this at some point. But let me again put on my accounting cap for a second. Liberty Media owe a debt of gratitude to that. I know we're not keen on shareholders and stakeholders. We should declare those words expletives. But they exist, and Liberty Media owe a debt of gratitude and care to their shareholders who are in this thing to see capital growth and ultimately line their back pockets right. So how do you balance that, Peter? I know that we're arguing that F1's gone too far, that green is too much of a priority as at December of 2024. But how do you balk that? How do you be Netflix drive to survive, but not too much? What do we need to rein that back in a tad, Peter?
You can't do it. You've either got to have what we've got, or you've got to do a completely self-governing world championship.
Oof.
You can't, there's no happy medium, because you've hit the nail on the head. The minute you've got to worry about stakeholders, STEAK probably, and their pockets being lined, the sport will go downhill. As I've said it many times, I'm not a fan of commercial rights being an issue in motorsport. We never used to have commercial rights, and it's considered to be the holy grail now. And the equivalent, obviously, on Wall Street or in the city is selling your company, going public, doing whatever. And I don't think that's a great thing. Tell me how many restaurants have got better once they've been taken over by a conglomerate. And it's the same with Formula One. I totally get the importance of social media and of things like Netflix, and that's doing a good job, because Bernie completely ignored all that, so that void had to be filled. But it's been filled now. Otherwise, in order now to make Formula One what it was, and as efficient as it was in terms of race to race administration and efficiency, you got to go back to a sort of Bernie autocracy, and that'll never happen now, because of the great God commercial rights. So the only way to do it is to set up a new championship and start from scratch. That'll never happen, of course. So we're kind of we got to live with what you got. And we talk about the current FIA president. I mean, the reality is that if somebody who was very opinionated and very autocratic was in that position, he'd find it almost impossible to govern, because there'd be so many constraints around him, so much red tape in the system, so much bureaucracy in the system, that you wouldn't be able to do what you want to do anyway. By now it's too late. And that's it. Maybe I sound a bit depressing, but it is the case. It's too late now.
Man, this is all very depressing, Peter. I thought.
Well, I wouldn't want to see good guys like Derek Warwick and Alex Wirtz, and I mentioned a few others. I wouldn't want to see those guys waste their time trying to become FIA president, because they'd probably have early heart attacks if they did. The amount of bureaucracy and red tape there is there now.
as damning an indictment.
You got all you can be is a schmoozy politician, and spend your time worrying about road safety and a few other things that are good for the planet, and not worry about Formula One too much, and just let the chaos continue.
Since we're speaking of politics, Mohammed Ben Sulayem, head of the FIA, was asked around some of the comments of the GPDA. George Russell, head of the GPDA, from a driver's perspective, has said that all they want to do is be involved. Let us know, be a bit open and honest and transparent about hiring and firing. Why is Nils Wittich gone as an example? The drivers weren't even consulted. Mohammed Ben Sulayem, head of the FIA's response was, the way that I run the FIA has nothing to do with the drivers. To that, Mr. Windsor, you respond how, sir?
Well, if it was Bernie saying that, I would totally get it. And I'd say to myself, yeah, he's probably right. Because the last thing Bernie needs is drivers phoning him up, complaining about safety or wanting things that cost money. And Bernie will just put the phone down on them, and drivers should be seen and not heard, and get in the race car and keep their mouths shut and not be paid very much. That was the Bernie philosophy of Formula One life. And it worked pretty well, certainly for his own drivers at Brabham. But for the current president to say that is odd, because he's not in anything like Bernie's position of success or achievement or record. But I come back to my point. I cannot imagine there's any other type of person now that could be the FIA president other than the type of president we have now, because it is all about red tape, bureaucracy, and having enough money to sustain your position as president in the first place and to get all the votes mustered for the next round. So even if he was voted out, I think you'd find the next president would be pretty similar anyway.
Yeah.
As I say, it would be a waste if you had somebody with real racing blood in their veins in that role, because they wouldn't be able to do anything anyway, and it would just not be to their health beneficial benefit. So I don't know. I'm a bit confused by that. I'm also confused by George Russell as president of the GPDA trashing Pirelli all the time. I just don't get that. And I think he should be sanctioned for that. I think it's a very bad thing and a bad example that he's setting.
He's not winning any hearts and minds at Pirelli, is he, George? But he was on.
Well, I don't know about that. He shouldn't be with the fans either, because the fans benefit a lot from what Pirelli are doing.
Yeah. And
they do it in a pretty effective way, don't they? If you take the hot laps into it and all the signage and the money they put into the sport and generally what they do and the enthusiasm they have, you don't need a front-running Grand Prix driver constantly, rubbishing them.
I think George's, again, if I play devil's advocate for a second here, Peter, that George's point of contention is the variability between the tyres as far as one race weekend to the next.
But that's always been the case with Pirelli. It's always been the case. And it was the case with Goodyear. It was the case sometimes with Michelin as well. Look at the 78 season when Michelin would dominate one Grand Prix and then the tyres would go off in 3 laps in the next. That's tyres. It's black art. And so long as one car and one driver out there is getting it right, you can't complain about the tyres anyway. Yeah. If every car in the field comes in with blistered tyres and they can't do more than a lap, then maybe you've got grounds for complaint. But so long as there's one guy doing it, forget it. Keep your mouth shut.
Yeah, good shout. Go on then. Let's talk about George very quickly, because I got I was drinking very much from the cup of George Russell Kool-Aid. I was looking at the interactions between him and Max Verstappen at the post-quali press conference, and I saw in George a driver who is much more serious than Lando as far as the way he interacts with Max outside the cockpit. And again, they were talking about the 55 milliseconds that he claims that he lost because he had to he had to get off the black stuff. And was that Max's fault? Was that Lando? Was that Fernando's? Or was that George? But just in the way that George interacted. So I was hopeful that George was going to live up to that talk and offer some sort of resistance as far as Max Verstappen's concerned into turn 1, lap 1. Only for Max to go and do what he's always done all throughout this season, Peter, and lasted the late breakers into turn 1, and it was never a question, right? Talk to me about who do you think's going to be of the next one. So I've always said that you've got Esther, Lewis, and Max. Of the next ones being George, Charles, Lando, Oscar potentially as well, you could put in there. Who do you think of the aforementioned again, to save a dying puppy, Peter, who would you put your money on to challenge a Max or a Lewis of that next tier of driver?
And just to make one point, I don't think Max outbraked George. I think he did what he always does. I think he braked at the right moment to come out of the brakes and to be traveling a little bit quicker than George going into the corner and then letting the car do what it does and just react with beautiful foot and handwork. I don't think it was an outbraking thing. In fact, I think George outbraked Max, and you could argue maybe Lando outbraked both of them. But it was so let's just think it wasn't just outbreaking, it wasn't bravery, it wasn't this, it was just pure finesse from Max and perfect positioning of the car where George, although George was trying to intimidate him, he always could see Max in the position where George wanted to be. And that was enough in the end for George to have to back away. Sorry, what was the question? Who's the next Max or the next person to take it to Max?
Yeah. So I thought that because of the way George
Charles Leclerc for sure.
Over George, do you think?
Well, I think if Charles Leclerc was in George's position, he might have. Well, I think he would have been on new tires. Actually, I think he would have been a bit more organised. That's what can I say? I think if George had been on new tires, I think he would have had the lead into turn one. He should have anyway. And I think Charles probably would have ensured that he was in that situation. Having said that, he wasn't. But then Ferrari are in a different position in Qatar, and they were just going through tires like crazy, just trying to get the car to work. But if he was in, what I'm saying is, if he was in the Merc, I think he would have made sure he had a new set of tires. Lewis had a new set. Why didn't George? It just seems bizarre. Anyway, I kind of weaved around your question. I think you're talking about the next generation there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was trying to think. Oscar's getting a little bit ragged, isn't he? And he's all that lovely work he was doing on early, getting into the corners a little bit earlier, really driving on the front end, seems to have slipped away, probably because Lando's been doing such a good job. And on setup, they've been starting to say to him, this is what Lando's doing, do this or that. And he's starting to go down the Lando route of longer corners again. And so I think that's a little bit disconcerting, if that's the right word. I was trying to think, actually, maybe Pierre Gasly, maybe.
Oof, he's not,
but he's a little bit wild, right on the edge, I think, still to be the next one. I need to think about that.
We'll come back to it. Because
why do we need to worry about that? That's not important, is it? Do we care?
I suppose if you're invested in the leveling of the competitive landscape and you don't want either Max or Lewis to run down the road by themselves again like they did in 2021 and almost have a two-tiered championship, then that's something that you've got to be concerned about, right? Who has
but in the short term though, 2025 is going to be a little bit like this year, I think, in that nobody's going to have a car that's going to be really good throughout the year. And it could even be more competitive. Ferrari will probably lift their game a little bit over the winter. Yeah. And Mercedes will probably be a little bit more consistent. McLaren will probably stay about where they are. And Red Bull will be maybe a little bit more consistent than they were. But it's going to be a really competitive year. So I don't think we need to worry for 25. And 26, it's nothing about drivers. It's all to do with the new cars and the new power units and the new chassis. So I don't think we should worry about the next generation yet. I think we need maybe 27, 28, we can have that discussion. But right now, what teams like Sauber need, they don't need a young gun. They just need to get the car working. And Valtteri Bottas actually would have been a very good guy to have kept in that role, I think. But anyway, there you go.
Good shout. I think the source of my concern is this, Peter. I think as a microcosm, the Qatar Grand Prix served to give colour to the level, the extent of the difference between a driver like Lando and Max, not necessarily in terms of absolute speed, because Lando's right there with Max, I would contend. But as far as his ability to think in real time and manage a race, it feels like Max Verstappen is from another planet as versus Lando. Lando doesn't see the double yellows, and do you know what I mean? He's all... If past his prologue, Peter, again, you did the video
a little bit. I think
all the mistakes.
I think Lando's in a weird stage in his career because he doesn't seem to realize how close he got to maybe winning the world championship this year.
Exactly this.
And he's now kind of back. All that pressure of trying to win the championship has gone away, and he's all smiles and wonderful. And we got to win the Constructors' Championship. We're all big mates and going to give the sprint win to Oscar because he was so good to me in Brazil. But he seems to have lost sight, or McLaren had done a very good job of enabling him to lose sight of the big picture, which was that he could have been still in the running for the World Championship. And he didn't have a slow car in Qatar at all. He had a great car in Qatar. And so deep down in his psychology, he probably knows that, but doesn't let it come out too much. And so he's a bit confused, I think, is the ultimate explanation. I think Lando he's a beautifully smooth driver, beautifully harmonic with the car. His corners are longer than Max Verstappen. So I actually don't agree with you that he's as quick as Max. I don't think he is as quick as Max, but I think he's not far away. But I don't think that matters when it gets to a race, because then it is all about finesse and touch. And Lando's really good on that, really good on tire management, really good on the way he talks to the race team as well on the pit wall. I think he's got one of the best demeanors of all the drivers. And as for missing the yellow thing, as I said, I mean, to me, all you can do sometimes is put yourself in the situation of the driver. And if that was me, I probably would have missed it as well with all the mayhem going on. Yeah. So I don't think that was a major black mark for him any more than I think Baku was a black mark. I think it was a black mark for McLaren for bringing him in the first place and putting him in that situation.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying with that. And McLaren, again, dropped the ball this weekend on a number of occasions. I just think, Peter, to draw it back to the point, if all roads, all driver championship roads go through Max Verstappen, at least for the next few years. And again, if Max...
Well, only for next year. We don't know for 26. Red Bull might have the slowest car on the grid. They might. Who knows? It's such a big question mark. We don't know.
There are variables.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, absolutely. You make the point. But I still... Okay, on the proviso that Max can get a half-decent car underneath him, a decent set of wheels, all roads will go through Max and or Lewis. Well, we'll come on to Lewis very shortly. If that's the case, then Peter, Lando, we're not the comparison, right? Like I've done loads of laps on a karting track. I would have absolutely missed the double yellows. We're not the comparison though, Peter. Max Verstappen is, and if Max picked up the double waved yellows and Lando had 2 bites of that cherry, a flashing yellow light, and then the double waved, that for me is going to be the source of his continuous improvement, that he has to have a look in the accountability mirror and solve for some of these mistakes that he's been making this year, don't you think?
Well, I don't think he's been making too many mistakes of that type. He's been making other mistakes, maybe slow starts, or maybe pushing at the wrong time, or I don't know, McLaren-induced things. It's unlike Lando to make that sort of error. But there were mitigating circumstances. There was chaos. There was debris already. He was behind Max for a start. Yeah. So he hasn't got the same view that Max has got. I mean, the reality is that should be on the pit wall that information is coming to the driver as a belt and braces, particularly if you're behind another car. Double yellow, be ready, Lando. Why was that not happening? I presume it wasn't happening because Lando made the mistake. Yeah. We don't know really. We got to put ourselves in the cockpit of that McLaren to know exactly what happened. But my point is that there was so much mayhem that regardless of what Lando did, I think basically they shouldn't have given him the penalty. I think it should have just been, okay, we'll let this go. We're making enough errors ourselves. It's absolutely ludicrous for us to start penalizing a driver in this situation. And let's face it, that he got that time on Max, and within 2 laps, Max had got the gap back again. So, it was, you got to read that into it as well.
Yeah, I think it sounds like you agree with Andrea Stella for once, Mr. Windsor. He argued that they've got to consider the proportionality and the specificity of the context that was Lando Norris under those double yellows. That because ultimately he's transgressed, of course he has. But to what end, Andrea Stella said, it wasn't dangerous, there was nobody on the track, and ultimately 10 seconds, Andrea Stella contends, was probably a little bit too harsh. Do you think the 10-second stop-go penalty, like Andrea Stella, was a tad too harsh for Lando's transgression?
Well, yeah, of course I do, because I don't think he should have got the penalty in the first place. And the reason I keep saying that is not because there was no... I don't say that because nothing bad happened and because it wasn't dangerous. I say that because the FIA were making mistakes themselves at that moment. That is my point. And when the FIA are making mistakes and having trouble with their yellow lights, whatever it is, on the safety car, and they should have had that piece of debris picked up long before it was smashed, when all that's going on, that's not a moment to start penalizing a driver for misinterpreting the yellows. I think in normal conditions, if the FIA are doing everything correctly, I don't agree with Stella. I think a rule is a rule, and I think you should slow down for it, as Lando did in Baku correctly. But here, quite clearly, Lando didn't see it, and you have to wonder why he didn't see it. I say it's because of the mayhem that was going on, because he's pretty good, Lando. He's got pretty good eyesight, believe me.
Yeah.
And if he can make that mistake, it can't be entirely due to Lando just being sloppy or half asleep. I'm afraid that was due to the mayhem that was going on and the mess that was happening there. And if that's the case, the FIA had no right really to penalize a driver. They needed to sort their own house out first.
Very well said, sir. Let me ask you about Mr. Lewis Hamilton, Peter, because he had another
Sir Lewis Hamilton, I think, isn't it?
Sir, correct. Well corrected, Peter. Sir Lewis Carl Davidson Hamilton had a bit of a mare this weekend, didn't he? Offered to park up the car and retire it when there was little to nothing on the table as far as points and upside. Let me pitch the question to you this way, Peter. Many people have said, David Coulthard included, that by dint of the many mistakes that Lewis is making now, he made another critical one off the line, full starting. By dint of those mistakes, that this can only be a symptom of Lewis getting on in age, and potentially that Lewis's best days are behind him now. On the same podcast, David Coulthard and Eddie Jordan put forth the supposition that Ferrari have made a mistake signing Sir Lewis because it's no longer prime 2018 fire-breathing Lewis Hamilton, that now this dude is potentially, if not over the hill already, approaching that very soon. What do you make of that, Peter? Are they talking nonsense, or
yeah, generally, I'm afraid they are, as they always did, which is always great. I love to go and talk nonsense with Eddie Jordan many a time in the yellow motorhome. Nobody better to talk nonsense with than Eddie Jordan. Bless him. No, I mean, what I thought was so funny with Mercedes was how whenever Lewis said, gasping for breath, what lap times am I doing? What are they doing at the front? Or how far am I behind? The answer he got was usually something, 1.3 seconds, Lewis, when in reality it was 2.5, or 5 seconds, when in reality it was 10 seconds. They were sort of watering down the news to try and keep him as confident as possible. No, I mean, pulling up on the grid at the wrong place, I know it was only a small thing, but this Oscar Piastri, Pierre Gasly have done it. You could say, oh, well, other drivers do it. I think personally it's an inexcusable error. As I've said before, there are plenty of things not in your control in a Grand Prix car. One of them, it's a bit like the grip you got for a golf club. One of them is starting in the right place. It's not that difficult. And that to me is a symptom, not of a driver getting old or losing his fire. It's just of a driver completely lost interest in what's going on because he feels detuned and feels, well, yeah, but as I've said that, he shouldn't feel detuned. He should feel on top of the world because he's about to join Ferrari. What a thing. He should be absolutely on the top of his, I was going to say form, but that's the wrong word. He should be on top of the world, his world, and really enjoying it. And I suppose, that he might be a bit sloppy now with Merck because he's just so detuned with the performance of the car and also with jolted by how quick George is all the time. Yeah. And then have Ferrari made a mistake? Well, I've said from day one, of course, they've made a mistake, which is that they've got Charles Leclerc and you got Carlos Sainz. It's almost a perfect match. Why do you want to change that? And Coulthard and Jordan, from what you're saying, seem to think that the reason that Ferrari decided to hire Lewis is because they thought he'd be a firebranding megastar who would blow Charles away. Well, I can't think Freddie Vasseur is that stupid. He would know that he's got to look after Charles Leclerc and he's his chosen driver for the future. And he's probably thinking, on the contrary, by the time I get Lewis, he'll be fairly detuned, bit over the hill, perfect number 2 for Charles Leclerc. So in that sense, Ferrari haven't made a mistake other than they've split up a really good partnership that they have now, really for no reason, because Carlos Sainz could play the same role in Lewis, possibly be a little bit quicker on occasion. And so if that's the case, but personally, I think Lewis will get will rejig himself over the winter, and I think he'll arrive at Ferrari very relaxed and very able to be the Lewis Hamilton that we've seen and known and loved for many years, with the proviso that he's got Charles Leclerc to beat in the other car, and that's not an easy thing. But he'll be where Carlos Sainz is, a little bit nearer maybe on occasion. On some circuits, like say Interlagos in the wet, he'll probably be a bit nearer Charles. Around Qatar, I doubt it. But Silverstone, yeah, he'll be right there with him, won't he?
Yeah.
Melbourne, he'll probably be pretty near him, I would have thought. Bahrain, he won't be far away. No, I think Lewis will be fine at Ferrari. But I'm amazed that Coulthard and Jordan are thinking that the reason they signed Lewis is because they wanted him to go and blow Charles away. Come on, that was never going to be in Freddie's mind, I don't think.
So I've got a couple of concerns with Lewis. I think the first item on the docket, as far as my Lewis Hamilton concerns, is his intonation, the tone, and the way he's kind of self-reflecting verbally. Right, he said on a couple of occasions this race weekend that I'm slow now. Like, what? Lewis Hamilton saying that he's slow? I can't believe that for a second. And the sabotage merchants will say, well, he's only saying that as a red flag to say that there are things outside of his control, of course, Mercedes and the setup of the car, and that he's blaming that. But then if you look at the mistakes as they've occurred, Peter, so like you mentioned that there are certain tracks that Lewis Hamilton is borderline invincible around, right? Canada, Silverstone as an example. The mistakes that has happened in qualifying are all happening in Sector 3 and Q3, Peter. And again, that leans into Toto's comments. And he said that there's something about this aerodynamically sensitive ground effect car in conjunction with this set of Pirelli tyres that doesn't, you don't optimize for lap time when you push, as Lewis does, 100%, super aggressive on turning, etc., etc. How can Lewis fix for that between now and next year, Peter? Is that something?
He can't. What he's got to do is get into a Ferrari, have a better car. I mean, that's Toto's correct, but that's only because he's driving that Mercedes, which George has got on top of, and it does speak to how well George is driving and how quick he is at this moment. But then again, Lewis is detuned. But in a Ferrari, I think he'll have a better car, and I don't think that'll be an issue. All the things Toto's talking about, he's talking about as if everybody's got the same problems. Well, I'm afraid they don't have those problems at McLaren. Most of the time, they don't have them at Red Bull, and a lot of the time, they don't have them at Ferrari. So I think he'll be pleasantly surprised at how nice the Ferrari is to drive after the Mercedes.
Yeah, here's hoping. Let me pitch this final one at you as far as Lewis is concerned, because there was a massive uproar in the Lewis Hamilton fan community at comments that Toto said in the book. I want to say it's called Inside Mercedes F1. When talking about Lewis Hamilton and the contract negotiations, he said that there was a reason why they only offered him a 1+1 deal, 1 year basic with an option for an additional year, because there is such a thing as cognitive decline. And everybody loses their sharpness. Ultimately, Toto says, and again, he was talking about the Lewis Hamilton circumstance, ultimately, everybody has a shelf life. What do you make of Toto's keen to talk about this Lewis Hamilton circumstance and losing him out the team in that way, Peter?
But when he's talking about the cognitive decline and shelf life, he's talking about himself, I guess, is he, Toto?
That's what he said. That's what he came out and said after the fact when he was challenged on it. But the paragraph in the book, he's talking about the broader circumstance of Sir Lewis Hamilton leaving, the 1+1, couldn't give him that, wanted to build for the future. He'd had conversations.
Yeah, but if Toto's undergoing cognitive decline, he's going to do anything, isn't he? Toto's talking about his own cognitive decline, isn't he?
So this is what he came out and said after the fact, Peter.
Yeah.
When you read the stanza in the book, the context is this. He's looking to build for the future. He says that he's had chats with Sir Alex Ferguson and Pep Guardiola and how they managed to rebuild their teams once a mega star Cristiano Ronaldo would leave, and how they managed to bring their team back to the top and win silverware there. So he's talking very specifically in the book, at least, about the circumstance surrounding Lewis.
Yeah, but who did Alex Ferguson coach? Which team was that then?
So Sir Alex was Man United, and they went through.
Okay, so what car did Man United build?
I know what you've done.
It's all about cars. What is he talking about? Why is he talking to soccer managers as if if you had the greatest driver in the world, he could drive a Sauber around and win the Grand Prix. I mean, it's nothing to do with driving. It's all to do with cars. I mean, this complete and utter nonsense. And as I said before, you either believe in Lewis Hamilton or you don't. And if you do, you build a team around him and you make it work and you get the best from him. And if you think he's maybe a little bit over the hill, you have a bit of a joke with him and you carry on and you get the very best from him. And you make allowances maybe for a couple of areas where he's not going to be quite as good as he was 10 years ago. Not difficult, very easy to do. You don't need to talk to soccer managers for that. What you need is very, very good engineers that know what they're doing and build a decent car. And that's what presumably Toto's actually talking about, I would imagine. It's what he should be talking about. And they haven't done that. Haven't done that on a consistent basis since 2021. So that's it. End of conversation. I don't really understand. I mean, is this in a book or what? Do people read books anymore? Motor racing books? I don't think they do they? It seems a bit odd, the whole thing. All I can say is the only thing I'm surprised about with Lewis, as I said before, is that right now he can look back on an unbelievable Formula One career. And rather than Mercedes getting away from him and George winning the races and maybe even the World Championship next year and wondering what he's going to do next, he's got a Ferrari contract in his pocket. Talk about unbelievably lucky. And I can't imagine that he wouldn't be feeling that when he gets out of his private aircraft and gets home and crashes down on the bed. He must feel, oh, I'm so glad I'm going to Ferrari. And if that's the case, as I keep saying, I think he'll be a very, very good racing driver next year. I can't imagine he's getting back thinking, oh, no, I've got to go to Ferrari now. I've got Charles Leclerc to have to race against and all those guys, Freddie Vasseur to deal with. Of course, he's not saying that. He's saying, yeah, I can't wait to get to Ferrari, bring on the pasta. Isn't he saying that?
Yeah, you would hope so, Peter.
Yeah, of course he is.
You would
and as I say, keep the expectations low. If he does a Carlos Sainz type job, he's done the job, isn't he? He's still winning Grand Prix. And I doubt as I said before, I don't think he'll win a world championship there, because to win a world championship, you need a very good car. And if it's a very good car, Charles Leclerc's going to win the championship.
Oh, Peter, you're breaking millions of hearts out there.
Well, I don't think I am, really. Everybody knows that, don't they? Surely. I mean, Charles Leclerc is a super, super quick driver.
He's not bad.
And he's getting better all the time.
No.
I've always said, it's Lewis, Max, and Charles are the three best in the world at the moment, with Lando, George next up, obviously. But those three are still head and shoulders above the rest. Right now, obviously, the jury's out about Lewis, but I'm sure he'll be right there. He'll be very, very good next year. He just won't be quite as good as Charles. That's all over a season. But he'll win Grand Prix. Don't worry. He'll win a race or two. He'll probably win Monaco or something. Everyone can have a laugh.
Oh,
but
Charles beating Lewis next year, Peter. Polemic, any
championship.
Controversial.
Yeah, he's just a perfect. He's almost a perfect all-round driver now. I mean, what a drive yesterday from Charles Leclerc in a difficult car around Qatar. Really good.
He's making a mug of me and my criticisms of him of late, Peter. Here's where I will go on. Let me play devil's advocate for fun. Fits and gigs. I think Charles Leclerc, my criticism of him is that he's historically, not this season. This season has been analogous in this sense. But Charles has made historically too many mistakes of the unforced variety. I'm not sure that I can take this season in isolation of proof positive that going forward, Charles still doesn't have that gene, still doesn't have a cheeky mistake of the unforced variety in his locker. And I think Lewis, if he's had his Weetabix and becomes Lewis of 2018 again, I think Lewis will dine on those sort of things, Peter. And over the course of a 24 season championship, Lewis of 2021, I don't think Charles, on any given Sunday, Charles will out-qualify Sir Lewis. But over the course of a 24 race championship in long form, I don't think Charles Leclerc, as brilliant as he is, stands a chance of keeping with Lewis.
Really? Oh, well.
I don't think so.
I disagree. I think Charles will always have him in qualifying. I think in the race, Lewis will be nearer, but I think Charles very polished. You don't drive as well as he did in Brazil in the wet and Qatar yesterday without being right there.
He's not.
He is right there. Absolutely no doubt about that. And Lewis will be not far away. Don't despair. He'll win his share of Grand Prix if the car is good.
Yeah.
But if you're expecting him to beat Charles Leclerc in the World Championship in a very good Ferrari, I think you're going to be disappointed.
Oh no, Peter, say it's not so. No. Breaking millions of hearts. Let's see.
I'm probably winding up Lewis now, and he's probably going to go out and drive better than ever before.
Yeah. Weaponize
Show that
it.
Peter
That's
Windsor.
what we want to see.
Yeah,
Fire breathing
exactly.
Lewis
Yeah, yeah,
Hamilton again.
yeah, yeah.
But hey, finally, Mr. Windsor is
Yeah.
around third base.
Well, no, one thing I want
Go.
to say,
No,
because
of course.
you chastised me before we went on live, saying Max, that wasn't great car control from Max. He made a mistake when he was warming up the rears on the hard tire. Well, of course he would say that to the BBC, wouldn't he? Because what else is he going to say? Oh no, that was my amazing car control, and I was just trying it. But I tell you what, that was him just flicking the car. He was just feeling the rear. Maybe it went out a little bit more than he wanted, and that under that heading it was a mistake. But he deliberately did that for sure. And that just shows his flair, doesn't it? And the only reason I commented about it is because it's very rare that we ever see Max with more than about 1 degree of opposite lock on the car anyway. 100%. And there we were. Yeah. Terry Neuville, emulation. Yeah. Brilliant.
And that's his gift, is it not, Peter? The ability
they've all got that. I think they've all got that.
To that extent, though,
Yuki Tsunoda's not bad on car control. It's just when you use it and how you use it. And if you're leading a Grand Prix on cold, hard tires, and the guy behind's in a better car and doing a better job with its tire warm up, you've got to be pretty confident of what you're doing to flick it around. I mean, I remember watching Fernando doing that on the warm up lap and actually spinning the car. And this is Fernando Alonso, and his car control's not bad.
Yeah, he isn't bad.
That was in Nürburgring one year in the Renault.
Oof. Go on then, Mr. Windsor. Let me ask you this finally. Checo Perez. Christian Horner was asked post-race, is that it for Checo? Or do you leave him to make his own decision since he's a grown man and a very experienced 14 years deep F1 peddler? To which Christian Horner responded, well, listen, he is a grown man, and I think at this stage he knows the lie of the land and he'll make his own decision. To which Sky presenter host responded, does that mean that it's out of your control then, Christian? And Christian responded very tongue-in-cheek with a glint in his eye and said, well, Checo will make his own decision. Take from that what you will, Peter. What do they do with Checo Perez going forward? Does he stand a chance, a hope in hell of maintaining a drive in a Red Bull racing car for 2025?
Well, I think he does, doesn't he? Because if he didn't, we would have seen it by now, and they would have done the logical deal and put Carlos Sainz in the car and kept Colapinto in the Williams. Because that's now not happening, and they keep going on about Carlos Sainz driving the Williams in the Abu Dhabi test. We've got to assume that Checo's done a really good job in terms of the business behind the scenes, and maybe even more sponsorship money is coming to Red Bull through his side of the garage. And therefore, yeah, of course. I mean, that interview sounds pretty fatuous to me. It's pretty normal. If a racing driver doesn't want to drive, he's going to retire, isn't he? And there's nothing a team manager can do about that. And yeah, if Sergio thinks that he just can't hack it anymore, I think he will retire. But equally, I can't imagine Red Bull now saying you've got to go, because the opportunity to do that was a couple of months ago and they decided not to. And he wasn't going well then. So I'm only looking at the evidence. To me, it's, if I was running the thing, I would have had Sainz in the car in a blink of an eyelid, Yeah. So it's not even a discussion. But equally, I'm not privy to the financial situation there. Maybe Red Bull have said to the team that you've got to find more and more. You've got to find 50-60% of the budget now from the car income and not rely on Red Bull so much. If they've said things like that, it kind of makes sense that you'd want to have a guy like Perez in the car, because he does occasionally produce on the track, but equally he delivers a lot of money.
Let me throw a couple of cheeky stats at you, Peter, to colour this conversation. Of the past 50 qualifying sessions in F1, Checo Perez has beat Max Verstappen once. And then 2022 Singapore, Checo Perez won that Grand Prix. Since then, he's only won an additional incremental, even 2 Grand Prix over the same time period that Checo's won 2 races. Max Verstappen has won 3 championships. I think his position now is untenable, Peter. I don't think he'll be driving next year.
Yeah, but you could argue on the other side of the coin that he's been the perfect number 2 and it'll enable Max to win those championships. Unlike Oscar Piastri, who's been too quick and he's prevented Lando from winning the championship.
True.
So you've got to get back to that balance of having the right driver in the other car if you've got a great, quick championship contender in one of them.
Agreed.
And that's what Perez would say, would he not? And as I say, I said it tongue in cheek, but maybe that new front wing they put on the car halfway through the sprint race on Perez's car was the key to Max getting the car sorted in the Grand Prix. We don't know,
100%.
do we? Maybe he
No,
played a
no,
major role in that
no, no,
win
no,
without
no.
us knowing.
No, you're right on the money. Right on the
You
money.
know, he could have. I'm not saying he did, but he could
No,
have.
no, you are
And
right.
equally, as I keep saying, the whole Oscar Piastri thing, if they'd kept Daniel Ricciardo in that McLaren, I think Lando would have 37 more points than he has right now.
Peter, I don't think you know how on the money you are, or how frequently you are. I'm going to change your name, Peter Stradamus. Do you know what I mean? It's got to be that going for. There's a couple of things in there that I want to pull out very quickly. So I think you're right about your characterization, even as far as Checo Perez being the ideal second driver for Max Verstappen, was absolutely on the money until this season, right?
Season, I agree with you. There were occasions when he could have picked it up and done a better job. I agree.
100%.
But then this is the first year he's ever, well, certainly in the Red Bull career, he's had a few dodgy years, hasn't he? But in his Red Bull career, it's the first one that's gone this badly. I agree with that. But still, Max has won the Drivers' Championship. Yeah, you could say, well, Red Bull could be further up in the Constructors, and that's a good point. But then again, it was given the way that car went into a slump for Max, it was always a big ask for that team to win the Constructors' Championship this year. It was enough to win the Drivers. And the fact that it's between McLaren and Ferrari now, I think is pretty good, isn't it? It's well away from the Max thing, and we've got a different race going on, a different fight. Yeah. And it's kind of shame on Mercedes that they're not in there. Oof. One of their customer teams taking on Ferrari. Put it into real perspective. What does Toto say about that in the book?
I think that's a subject that he dances around. Peter, let me give you these two things quickly, because again, I think you've hit on gold here. Apparently, the reason why Checo Perez absolutely has a hand in sacrificing himself at the altar of developmental advantage test session, because that's exactly what was the sprint race for Checo. It was the front wing, and it was a ride height adjustment and some cheeky suspension setup changes that again enabled Red Bull to unlock that pace, particularly in the hands of Max Verstappen. But
that's what it looked like to me, that he was doing a very good job with the testing. Yeah. And for sure they're playing around with ride heights.
Oh, 100%. 100%. And it would make sense. Maybe it's not true. And then secondly, let me give you your flowers, sir, because you've been beating this Lando Norris lack of support from McLaren drum for a while now, and especially at the hands of Oscar Piastri. And Lando Norris said this race weekend, he was comparing, he called, Max said that he could have won earlier with more races in hand if he'd been driving a McLaren or a Ferrari, to which Lando Norris responded, I think Max needs to try comedy. And then he expanded by saying, Max's circumstance at Red Bull is different. Yeah, he's got to do most of the development, and he doesn't have a rear gunner, a second driver in Oscar or Carlos Sainz who's going to defend him. However, Lando continued, that comes with an equal and opposite upside. I've got the pressure of having a young, hungry lion in Oscar Piastri, and I've got to contend with that, and that's difficult, Lando said. For the first time, I've heard him say that this year. And again, Peter, underlines the points that you've been making all season long, that Lando struggled to deal with that, and McLaren haven't exactly helped him, right?
Well, of course not. And because they've lost sight of the overall picture, because they're so in love with the concept of having two really quick drivers and both cars being contenders because the car's good in virtually every race. They just love that situation. They've lost vision of what it's actually all about. They don't have a Michael Schumacher, Max Verstappen vision of the World Championship. And they don't realize that the minute they got rid of Daniel Ricciardo, they made it a lot more difficult for Lando Norris to do what he can do at McLaren if they had a good car. I suppose they never imagined the car was going to be that good when they got rid of Daniel. But even if they had realized it, they still would have gone for Oscar, because they would have thought, yeah, Constructors' Championship, all these points. And nobody would have thought about Lando. Oh, well, what's going to happen there? And Lando, I think, has said something along the lines of, I wanted to pay that back to Oscar. And then he said, but next year, of course, we're starting from scratch, and Oscar's got a chance, and bigger chances I have to win the World Championship. I mean, that is exactly what I'm saying. It's a bit like Lewis at Ferrari. It's all very well to get excited about Lewis at Ferrari in a quick car, but he's got Charles Leclerc to beat in the same car. And Lando Norris has got Oscar Piastri to beat in the same car. And Oscar Piastri will go for a gap that maybe Lando won't. That's the difference. And that's a big problem for Lando. And I'm not suggesting that Lando changed the way he drives or the way he is or who he is, because I think he is who he is and he does a really good job. I just wish he'd get rid of all his social media and just focus on the job. But apart from that, he's got a major problem of how he's going to beat Oscar Piastri. Very big problem. And I can tell you now, if Oscar Piastri has a bit of luck and things go his way, first 3 or 4 races, and he's got, I don't know, 2 wins and a P3, and Lando's had 3 retirements or whatever, I tell you what, McLaren aren't going to say, this is Lando's team, we're now going to make everything work for Lando. They're just going to say, wow, you know, Lando will pick it up, but we're on the run with Oscar now. That's what will happen for sure.
I know.
And I hope, I don't know whether Lando realizes that. It's almost as if he doesn't realize that. He's not naive, I'm sure, but I don't know who he's listening to.
He doesn't know anything, Peter. He doesn't know why he got the penalty. Didn't see the yellow. This is the problem with Lando Norris.
And why does he think Max is dreaming if he thinks that Max would have won races earlier in a McLaren? Why does he think that's a silly comment to make? Because if the Red Bull was as good as the McLaren, and let's say you swap cars, I think he would have. He would have.
100%.
And I think Lando would probably, I mean, Lando's correct response would be, yeah, I'm sure that's right, because he would have only had Perez to beat in the other car. That's what he should have said, really, because it's logical.
It's a weird one with Lando, Peter. And I think this is, I'll bookend on this. I think this is why a lot of, Lando was the loved one, right? He had a gazillion fans all around the world coming into this season. But I think a lot of the F1 community have now turned their back on Lando because he talks the talk, but walking the walk is nowhere to be seen, right? He had a brilliant opportunity, and some of the drivers are saying it. George has said it. Carlos Sainz has said it. Lando had a brilliant opportunity to keep Max Verstappen honest and keep F1 fans around the world dialed in and interested through to the end of a climactic season a la 2021. And again, between him and McLaren, his team, they've made a habit of seizing defeat from the maws and jewels of victory, haven't they?
Yeah, I don't blame Lando. I think it's all McLaren. I don't think it's Lando. No, I think George or anybody's blaming Lando. They're completely wide of the mark. I don't know if you mentioned George, but it's McLaren. And it all started in Hungary. And that wasn't Lando. That was McLaren telling him to do that. You know, that wasn't Lando deciding to come in with 6 minutes to go at the end of Q1 in Baku. It was McLaren telling him to come in. That wasn't Lando making a terrible error going into the second chicane on the first lap of Monza and braking 100 meters too early. That was McLaren not having any control of their second driver, allowing Oscar to go around the outside and jeopardize both cars on the first lap of the Italian Grand Prix. And so it goes on. It was McLaren. It's nothing to do with Lando. It was a situation they created. I think Lando's done a really good job given all of that. I just wish he'd open his eyes and see what's really going on from 30,000 feet rather than just from the pit lane, you know, and this business of gratuitously of giving back a sprint race win to Oscar. It's ludicrous. Oh my God. I mean, Oscar owes Lando so much. One sprint win in Brazil doesn't equate to giving him the Hungarian Grand Prix, for Pete's sake. I mean, what's he thinking?
Yeah, no, I would agree. It's chaos. I don't know what's going on there. And worse, Peter, you heard that McLaren came out and said that that their first order priority was never the Drivers' Championship this year. Like, what do they do? Like, what? What are they?
Well, they would say that, wouldn't they? And I can tell you what, if they just won the Drivers' Championship, they're out of the manufacturers. They'd say, "Oh, we're not really into the manufacturers." Who asked them that question?
Unbelievable.
But here's a question:
Go on.
What happens when Freddie Vasseur sits down with Carlos Sainz and says, "Right, Carlos, this is a big race, Abu Dhabi. We've got a chance to win the Constructors' Championship. We really need to be working together as a team here. Total freedom of information from one side of the garage to the other. You know, if you're in front, no problem, just so long as we don't jeopardize what Charles is doing, and Charles will be the same with you. We've really got to operate as a team, all the team, the mechanics, the boys and girls in the team, everybody's fired up. The whole factory's behind us. We're going to do all we can to win the Constructors' Championship." And what happens when Carlos says, "So why are you firing me?"
Peter, jeez, you've nailed it. I doubt it's got to be a rhetorical question now.
Yeah, it is, of course. But you know, that is the ridiculous hole into which Ferrari have dug themselves. I'd like, and I think it's good that we're finishing on that note, because I still think it is one of the most hurtful things an athlete, let alone a racing driver, can go through, to be told that the start of the year you're going to be fired at the end of the year, but we're still going to give you 100%, and you win Grand Prix for them, and you help them almost win the Constructors' Championship with one round to go, and it's your last race. I think that is just a ridiculously, unspeakably difficult thing to ask of any racing driver. And I have more respect for Carlos Sainz, I think, than any other driver on the grid as a result, for the way he's handled this and the way his dignity more than anything else. You don't hear a lot about him moaning and complaining, do you? He just gets on with it.
Yeah.
A cool guy with a lot of class and a lot of finesse. And I'm really glad we have him around still, kind of, although it's going to break my heart to see him in a Williams scratching around in the midfield and the back of the grid, racing with Franco, not Franco, racing with, who was that? Gabriel Bortoleto,
Yeah.
Sainz, yeah, he's got past Bortoleto. I don't even want to hear it. Thank you very much.
I agree.
It's just terrible, absolutely terrible that this guy's been put in that situation.
But Peter is not, and again, I'll pitch back another rhetorical question at you. Is the fault not with us for being naive, for expecting F1 to do anything but sacrifice meritocracy and fairness at the altar of financial upside? Surely this is what F1 does.
Yeah,
always done.
I don't know. I wasn't in the meeting when they decided to get rid of Carlos and replace him with Lewis, so I can't really comment on that, other than to say, good old Ron Turanek had it right. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, mate. And he's right. It's not broke. Ferrari have not lost races and championships this year because Carlos Sainz hasn't been good enough. In fact, he's probably over-delivered given the pressure he's been under.
Wow. And
if Eddie and DC think that Lewis, or if they thought the reason they hired Lewis was because he was going to blow Carlos Sainz away, then I'm surprised, because that was never going to happen.
Mr. Windsor, impossibly brilliant as per usual. And a not bombshell, sir. We will close the call. You've been a legend as always, Mr. Peter D. Windsor. If you like and appreciate,
I tell you what, I'm on Blue Sky now. Forget it. I'm on Blue Sky now.
You've
I love Blue Sky.
Across.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's much better because it's real people and it's real information, people sharing their lives and their interests and their loves. And I think that's a great thing. X is far too full of acrimony and bitterness and all the stuff that comes with it.
But is it not just, are all your followers from X not just going to migrate across the Blue Sky?
I don't know, mate. I've no idea. I hope so. But,
with the same acrimony and
I think I had too many followers. I think far too many. I only want about, I don't know. I just want enough to be able to be mates with them all. When you have a big number, it doesn't mean anything, does it?
I agree. There is a law of diminishing
I'm not
returns.
being anyway disrespectful to anybody who's kind enough to sign up, but I just think a lot of people sign up because, oh yeah, tick this box, tick that box. It's not because they actually want to share anybody's content. But I get the feeling that is the case in Blue Sky.
Fair play. And a not bombshell. You can follow Peter D. Windsor on Blue Sky. I think you're still on X, but again, for the God tier.
Yeah, I'm on X, but there won't be much on there. And I'm still on Instagram, but only in Hindi.
Fair play. So you're getting the multilingual Peter Windsor content. Blimey. Like how much more? How much more can you ask for? But again, if you want the goatiest of all goats, Peter Windsor on YouTube. Go and follow on X and Blue Sky. If you like your content, ingesting it in audio form, then go and follow Peter on your favourite podcasting platform, the Short Corners Podcast. Thank you, each and every single one of you, for watching. As per usual, I've been Cameron CC. That's been Mr. Peter D. Windsor, the goatiest of all goats to ever have goated. Between now and next time, as always, remember to look but never stare.